Let's welcome in former Vancouver Canuck TSN hockey analyst, Mr. Frank Corrado. How are you?
I'm good. What's going on, fellas? Anything to report out in Vancouver?
Quiet week.
Stuff happening?
Yeah. What did you make of Rutherford?
I mean, I think the timing is interesting, especially considering like your team just played a really good game, arguably one of their best games of the season, and they're still right in the middle of this playoff hunt. But I don't know. It feels like something like that could have happened when the team was on the tailspin. And maybe they are still in the tailspin. I don't know, but it was weird timing coming off that St. Louis game. Regardless, I don't think one game here or there is going to change how anyone feels about the situation. And boy, was it ever revealing. If anyone had any kind of questions about, well, is it media driven? Are we making too big of a deal of it? I think those, notions are all squashed with the way that Jimmy Rutherford kind of laid it on the line. There was one thing that stuck out to me about the entire thing. The fact that Quinn Hughes' name got brought up kind of out of nowhere, wasn't it? All of a sudden, if we're going to move on, and then maybe Quinn Hughes has to move on as well. Whoa. What are we talking about here? Is everything on the table? And how long does it take to strip it down and build it back up? I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, but it was very revealing for sure.
It's what makes the trade for lesser options, which I think people are coming to terms with. Many people think Rutherford spoke to prep people for an underwhelming return. I mean, prepping the fans is one thing. You've got to prep Quinn Hughes for the underwhelming return, right? I mean, what's he going to – even if it's a decent player, we'll go back to the Rangers rumored deal, like a heel. Heel's a decent player, but it's not going to provide what JT Miller provides. What does Quinn Hughes think of that kind of a trade? And, how does he forecast his last 2 years in this deal?
Well, I think he would look at it and say, how did we get here? If you're in the market – if you live in Vancouver, you're a fan of that team, you guys, the media, you know how we got to this point, right? You could go and trace the steps. Miller comes in, Horvat goes out, you double down, you prioritize Miller. And then the crazy thing is, you knew, you're acknowledging that you knew that this was an issue the whole time, but you signed Miller, then you signed Pettersson, and you kind of just thought, hey, we're gonna play hockey. It's gonna be okay. This is gonna get squashed between the two guys, and we're hopefully not gonna have to worry about it. Hindsight's 2020. No one, I don't know if you were gonna prep for the worst, but it's not like this just popped up out of nowhere. So you kind of made the long-term plans. And so now, if I'm Quinn Hughes, how do you bring that back to Quinn Hughes? Just saw how you guys handled the long-term plans. How are you gonna do the next, bunch of long-term plans? Are you going to make similar mistakes? I know it's a very unique case, but you know what I mean? Do you have the trust after that, okay, These guys, they know what they're doing because they've seen it.
It shakes confidence. How would the rooms that you've been in, you think, react to something like this?
It's really weird. I kind of think there's always going to be a little bit of a divide, right? No one ever gets, regardless of whether you're in the room every single day, there's always that, what he said, what she said, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I feel like there are going to be players that probably lean to the Miller camp, and then there's probably players that lean to the Pettersson camp. So I can think of a million ways that it doesn't go well for the Canucks, because if you move on from Miller and you keep Pettersson, well, the guys that were in the Miller camp, how do they feel about this whole situation? Do they think that, oh, you sent the wrong guy out of town? We think this guy's not the right guy to lead us, and do they get over that, right? And it gets so soap opera-y now at this point, and then vice versa, right? So I don't know. I feel like the fracture, and it's hard to know because you're not in the room, but having experienced dressing rooms, it's not just two guys living the fracture. I think there's guys that kind of say, okay, well, I think this guy's the idiot. Well, I think that guy's the idiot, and then you have a little bit of a divide as well. I don't know. I'm saying, I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just trying to think, pretty sure that's how guys would think about it in the room.
By all accounts, this fracture was exacerbated in the wake of Bo Horvat's trade. And yes, they had a great season last year. So my question to you is, what happens if this team chose to trade Miller at that point and not Bo Horvat? Do you think they are as good a team last year? Are they a better team now? Where do you think they're at?
They're not as good as they were last year. Like, JT Miller had an unbelievable season last year. You can't, regardless of all this stuff, you can't argue it, you can't deny it. Like, truly one of the best two-way center in the NHL, and had the season to show for it. So I don't think last year happens without JT Miller, but probably it's a little easier for Pettersson to be himself. And
how much better is Pettersson? Yeah, we don't know the answer to that.
Right? Like, he probably doesn't live in the cloud of, whatever bothers him about JT Miller every single day. So maybe he's a better player because of it. Like, these are the things we don't know. But it would be probably a little more of a cohesive group with Horvat and not JT Miller. And, like, by all accounts, Horvat was the one that kind of bridge the gap and smooth things over between those guys to begin with. And, like, I stand by what I said at the time that happened. Horvat was your captain. Like, he was very deserving to be there in that position. Never did anything that, would kind of signal that he didn't want to be that guy. So I at the time didn't love it. It was proven, I guess, wrong to me because JT Miller and the team was so good last year, but here we are. And it's like, the same issues have kind of, crept up and they haven't gone away. And it's funny what, Jim Rutherford said, like, it goes away for a bit and then it comes back. Well, yeah, it comes back when you lose. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, when everyone's winning and things are going great, like, that's not the true test. The true test is, how do you get through the trying times? And whatever's gone on here, these guys have not been able to get through the trying times.
This isn't a rumor, but just walk me through this. Miller for Horvat, who says no right now?
I don't know if anyone says no right now.
You think both sides would be willing to hey, we should mediate this one?
I don't, realistically, like, if the Islanders, they want to stay relevant, right? They're getting older, though.
Fewer years left on the Miller deal, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's a lower cap hit by just a smidge.
It would be really weird if that happened.
It'd be really weird.
Yes. It would be really weird. Yeah. Like, I think ultimately when, I'm sure you guys are doing this now, you go down the rabbit hole of, like, okay, who would be a viable suitor for Miller? Who would be a viable suitor for Pettersson? I think there's more fits for Pettersson than there is for Miller. Like, I think the teams that would be looking at Miller are the teams that need something to put them over the top right now. Like, long term, like, I was doing Ottawa radio this morning and they were asking me about Pettersson and maybe, making a package out there around maybe Josh Norris or something like that. And I think there's some markets that look at this and say, this could be the next Jack Eichel trade. And maybe it could be. I mean, there's no guarantee. I think there's still room for skepticism. Like, in all this, I know it hasn't been easy for Pettersson. You can't undeniably say that he has held up his end of the bargain as far as the type of player he should be. So there is room for skepticism regardless of who moves on.
It's funny you mention teams out there circling all of this, but the Buffalo Sabres have been reported to be interested in Elias Pettersson and talking to the Vancouver Canucks. I would like to run down a few of the principles there and get your evaluations on them, because one of the names that's jumped out is Owen Power, the former first overall. And look, there's a school of thought that you need X number of games from a defenseman before you can get a true evaluation of him. Has he played enough? But you tell me, what kind of player is Owen Power? Do you see him fulfilling that first overall pedigree either now or going forward?
See, it's hard with the first overall pedigree for defensemen, right? Like, look back at the history, whether it's been Eric Johnson, Aaron Ekblad. Like, when you think of a defenseman getting picked first overall, Rasmus Dahlin, you're like, this guy should be winning Norris trophies. And maybe that's just not going to be the case. Maybe he's just going to be a really good defenseman. And I think in the case of Owen Power, that's fine. Like, he probably will not be, if you look at the guys that are doing it, whether it's Makar or Hughes, or if Werenski jumps into that mix, like, maybe Owen Power's not going to be that guy. Time will tell. Aaron Ekblad's not that guy. but he's really damn good. And he won a Stanley Cup last year for the Panthers, shutting down Connor McDavid. So I think, the expectations are one thing. The reality is a different thing. But for Owen Power, like, he probably came into the league, and this is how it goes down for everyone in Buffalo, having to do too much, having to play too much, having to handle too much by necessity, because that's the way that team has been built. And so, like, if you put him in a good situation, Owen Power is a really good defenseman, moves the puck well. Like, at his best, he has a lot of confidence. He's big enough to handle the rigors of things and the physicality. It's just about maturity and growing and all that kind of stuff, the natural progression of a defenseman. But like, Owen Power was picked first overall for a reason, and has been, given a lot of responsibility at an early age.
Yeah, and sometimes they're just the product of a weak draft. Like Chris Phillips, the first overall pick in 1996. All he did was play 1,200 games and be a stalwart defensively. It just turned out it wasn't a very strong draft that year. Do me Dylan Cousins. What's up with Cousins since he had the breakout 2 years ago?
I mean, yeah, you're right. 2 years ago has the big year. It's an interesting one because I called two games against the Sabres this season. I called one where he was really going through it. Like, he would have had 9 points and like 2 goals, and I don't necessarily know if he had scored on a goalie yet. Like, it was kind of right in the thick of things. And it's just like a player that was very unsure of himself, not necessarily as assertive as he could be. And then, like, it started to pick up for him. Puck started going in. He does have a good shot. Like, I've seen him score from distance, beat goaltenders clean, tops of the circles, that kind of stuff. So
did so versus the Canucks, yeah.
Yeah, like, there's something there for sure. You always have to watch these guys in Buffalo through, like, the Buffalo glasses. And it's sad to say that, but when you see all the players that have moved on from there and had success elsewhere, it's like you almost have to watch it with a filter on and be like, okay, that's that version of the player. What am I going to get? Like, if you got Bowen Byram, who plays all kinds of minutes for them, like, he skates up and down the ice and he's on the ice all the time. Like, what is the Bowen Byram version you're going to get? Or, you could get the guy and he's unbelievable. Or you could go the other way and be like Colorado and get Casey Middlestat, and he's buried on your fourth line right now. And, you don't really have a use for him in your top 6 per se. So it's a little tricky, I think, sometimes with a team that is struggling and lower in the standings and has the kind of, unfortunate track record that the Sabres have with players moving on and having success elsewhere. But Dylan Cousins has shown it already. And at times this season has shown the confidence that, gave him that breakout season 2 years ago.
I'm going to turn you back to Blake, but just Cousins and Byram for Pettersson. Would you do that if you're Vancouver?
I would be considering it, I think. Like, how do you not consider that? You're getting like a minute muncher. The thing with Byram is there's always going to be the red flags with, the concussion history. But let's be honest. A team that's acquiring Pettersson, you don't think they're looking at it saying there's red flags with this guy?
Yeah.
Like, the red flags are going both ways. Like, you're getting a good centerman, you're getting a really good defenseman, and you know what? Like, you're moving on from a guy that could be a 100-point player that at times was beloved in this market. Like, there's an attachment thing there as well, but
you're getting proof of concept. He's got 100 points. He's got the Selke votes. Like, all that has happened. You can't stuff it back in. Can
it happen again, though, Blake? Can it happen again?
Given his age, I think it's a reasonable expectation. With guys like Cousins and Byram, you're still banking on potential. Like, neither one of those guys has arrived as a star in the league, and Pettersson has.
I think you're kind of banking on potential with Pettersson too. Like, if you're acquiring him now, you're acquiring the guy that's on pace for less than 60 points this year. Like, I know it's recency bias, but it's recency. Like, this is what he's doing right now. And you know what? Maybe he'll turn it around if he's gone or Miller's gone, and he's going to be back, right? Like, we know he's done it. But I still think, like, if you're the acquiring team, you're like, I'm kind of hoping there's the potential here that this guy is not what he's shown this year, and he's more like what he's shown in the past. Like, realistically, the red flags go both ways.
Different sizes of red flags, but I hear you.
Yes, that's a good point.
So what I'm hearing from Blake Price in the role of Patrick Alvin is that if you sweeten a little bit, you're in the role of Kevin Adams, then we've got a deal here.
I do like the concept, but I do like the concept of Vancouver getting a defenseman out of all this. Like, they need a defenseman. And I think if you can bring in a guy in a trade, maybe there's some cost certainty and you don't have to overpay someone in the offseason. I don't know.
There's a whole.
I like the concept of getting a defenseman, Frank, but it's probably going to be at the expense of a top two center, unless Cousins and Byram and they both work out for Vancouver, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why you would have to consider that if you're Patrick Alvin.
Also, don't you think there's a million ways that Vancouver loses in this situation? Like Jimmy Rutherford said, there's no good solution. So
no,
right? For sure.
I can think of a million ways that Vancouver gets slaughtered with this whole thing. I have a hard time seeing the wins. So if you can grasp something that you can look at and say, okay, it's a marginal victory. I don't know. It's not. It's a very imperfect situation.
And this is where the criticism of Rutherford even coming forward and speaking can arise, and that I think it pours gas on the fire, and we saw it with JT Miller's comments today after the skate too, where he just refuses to comment. It's thrust into his face, and I don't believe that I'm of the mind that this has helped the situation at all, Jim Rutherford opening his mouth. And it was already a skeptical situation for the Canucks to reap the rewards for these two players. It feels like it's even more so right now.
I wonder how calculated it actually was, or if it was just I'm off the cuff, because he has a tendency to just, let it fly. But I also wonder,
open to
too,
interpretation,
if it's everyone knows you're in a position of weakness. Right? Like, everyone would admit you're in a position of weakness. Everyone knows you got to make a move. But if you double down on that, do two negatives turn into a positive? Like, did you go out there now and, spill all this tea and throw gasoline on the fire? And it's like, I almost doubled down to being in a point of weakness that people might look at it and say, is he close to something? Do I have to up something here? Like, is there a little bit of I'm not going to call it a sweepstakes, but I just think it gets you thinking a little bit if you're on the other end of things.
Yep. We wondered, is he trying to increase the urgency, fear of missing out with some guys around the league? Okay, buddy. Great stuff. Thank you for this. We'll catch up next week.
Okay, boys. Have a good one.